What I want all of you to think about is we're going to take just any old behavior. So we're going to take any behavior. So I want you to pick any behavior you want. Let's say, for me, let's say it's drinking a bubbly. Okay, that's going to be mine. But you pick any behavior you want. It could be one that you do. It could be one that somebody you know does. It could be whatever you want it to be, okay? But we're talking about any behavior, so it doesn't have to necessarily be like you don't have to qualify it in any way. You don't have to like put any value judgment on it. Just think about it as being a behavior. So it could be tapping a desk. It could be yelling. It could be typing on a keyboard. It could be whatever the hell you want it to be, okay? I think you get the point, okay? So what behavioral conditioning says is that when we see a behavior being something that is directly observable. So when we talk about meaning, for example, that's in our heads. Now there are arguments to be made that thoughts and emotions can be conditioned, but I'm going to talk mostly about behavior today. Okay, so thinking about any action. Okay. So now, if you think about that action relative to the environment or relative to another person, we can qualify that behavior as being either desirable or undesirable in a given context. Okay? So, for example, just to use my example of me drinking a bubbly. In a neutral setting that's completely like in a vacuum, me drinking a sip of bubbly is just what it is. It's just an action, okay? So it's just an input. There's no real value judgment to it. So you have to take into account context with behaviors, okay? So now context is going to dictate, and reinforcement is going to dictate, or conditioning is going to dictate whether or not me drinking a bubbly is a desirable behavior or an undesirable behavior. Okay, you following me so far? We're gonna start to look at bubbly as being desirable or undesirable, but you're gonna see that we don't necessarily make that judgment a priori or up front. I'm just drinking a bubbly. This can apply to any behavior. What we can do is if we determine, or context determines, that behavior is desirable, then what we might want to do is make that continue. We may want that behavior to happen more. So what I'm also going to write up here is desirable. Now, conversely, we may determine, given a various context, that my behavior of drinking the bubbly, we want to extinguish it or stop it, okay? Because it is undesirable. So whether or not me drinking the bubbly is desirable or undesirable is going to be dependent upon the way that this behavior gets conditioned or reinforced. Okay, so whether this behavior of me drinking the bubbly is going to continue or extinguish is going to be relative to the way in which the environment or the context responds to my drinking of the bubbly. Okay. I mean, I'm going to explain how that happens here in a second, but I want to make sure that everybody follows me so far because it's really important to understand this first part before I go any farther. So, interestingly enough, there are ways in which Twitch uses reinforcement mechanisms or conditioning mechanisms for all of you as viewers. So when my alert box goes off, that's a response to a desirable behavior. So this will all make sense here in a little bit, but this is the way that loot boxes affect people in video games. Like, this transcends lots of stuff. All right, like this is everywhere. And this is why I say this is so powerful, okay? We're going to start with me drinking a bubbly going towards being a desirable behavior that gets rewarded. So what we have here is in life, basically, I say this all the time to therapy students, is when you're working with clients or when you're thinking about working with people in general, or like whether it's coworkers, whether it's your children, whether it's your partner, whether it's the people around you, whether it's yourself, okay? What we genuinely want to do in life is reward desirable behaviors and punish undesirable behaviors. Okay? So if we deem my bubbly drinking to be desirable, the person or the people or the environment needs to reinforce or reward that behavior. And there are two ways in which we can reward behavior. Okay? So the first thing that we can do is what's called a positive reward. And I do apologize for my handwriting, okay? We have a positive reward. What this means is we would add something that is desirable to me in order to make sure that I continue to drink the bubbly. So here's an example, okay? So what this means is we're going to add a thing, reaction, whatever you want to call it, okay? So here's an example. So if I drank this bubbly and I took a sip, if every time I took a sip of bubbly, one of you donated $25 to the stream, what do you think is going to happen over time? I mean, I know this is kind of like a very obvious question, but this is just to kind of get your brains involved in thinking. I'd drink a hell of a lot more bubbly. I'd be drinking so much bubbly, and I would eventually run out of bubbly, which we'll get to in a second, Gecko. If I did it every single time, the interval of reward is also then predictable for me. And so I would be continuously drinking bubbly because I would continue to get $25 tips. Okay. So basically what this means is I'm adding a desirable response. Okay. Because what that makes happen is it will make me continue to do the thing. If you are in a relationship, for example, and your partner has a love language that's touch, okay? Or gift giving. Let's go with gift giving. Let's say that your partner is really supportive of you over the course of a week. And that's a desirable behavior for you, right? Like your partner listens to you. Your partner asks questions about your day. Your partner just kind of is, in general, acting with you in good faith, okay? One way that you would positively reward that, or could positively reward that to ensure that that behavior continues over time, would be to give a gift, okay? So maybe you buy flowers. Maybe you cook them their favorite food at the end of the week. Maybe you take them out on a date. Maybe you spend some extra time with them. You add something desirable to them as a way to reinforce that behavior. Okay? It should hopefully make sense. And so a lot of times as a therapist, when I'm working with parents, what I'm helping them realize is that if you want your kids to continue to do something desirable, you have to give them energy for that desirable behavior. You have to reward that desirable behavior. It doesn't have to be monetary. It could be stickers. It could be more time playing video games. It can be your attention. Okay, it could be a little Hot Wheels car. It could be whatever it is. But like rewarding that desirable behavior through adding something, okay, is absolutely a useful thing to do as a parent. At what point does that become manipulation? Well, I think that becomes manipulation, Ella, if you have malintent behind that. If you're doing it to isolate them, say like anytime somebody, like say your partner is doing things that can help isolate them so you can have more power over them, so you keep rewarding them for things that isolate them. So like let's say they end a relationship with a friend, or they're more distant from a friend, and you're really nice to them and you give them more attention because they're isolated from their people. Like that's kind of like a form of grooming. That's where that can be really dangerous. So manipulation is a bad thing if the intent behind it is harmful. So if my intent is to isolate you, is to hurt you, and I'm going to start rewarding your desirable behaviors for me as a means to hurt you, that's where it's not cool. If I am thinking like, hey, I really love that my partner listens to me, I love that my partner gives me attention, and so I'm going to reward that because I'd love to have more of that. Generally that's not so bad. It's kind of consensual. So this is one way that we can condition a particular behavior. Okay, so I get a $25 tip every time I drink bubbly. That's adding something to continue the behavior. So what we could also do is what's called negative reward or negative reinforcement. I want to stay away from saying reinforcement. We're going to talk about reward and punishment instead of reinforcement, punishment. Negative reward. And what this means is you subtract something that is you subtract an undesirable response. Let's say that all of you start spamming chat, and like you're just spamming my name over and over and over again, making it incredibly difficult for me to read chat. All right? We would say like I wouldn't be particularly fond of that. Okay, you start spamming links, you start talking nonsense, you start going just absolutely bananas in chat, and it makes it really hard for me to handle this. And let's say, okay, that I take a drink of bubbly and you stop doing that. I knew this is what was going to happen, and it's fine. I totally walked myself into that. Okay, now let's say I take the drink of bubbly and you stop doing that. That is removing something undesirable to me in order to reinforce or reward the desirable behavior. So an example of this in everyday life might be, if you clean your room, I will stop nagging you. Okay, so I will stop being obnoxious and riding your ass if I notice you clean your room. Okay? So that's like a really common example. It's removing something undesirable as a way to reward a desirable behavior from one person. Reward behaviors or condition behaviors through rewarding them if we deem them to be desirable. And you can do that through adding something that is desirable to the person who is behaving in a certain way, or you could subtract something undesirable to them in order to make sure that they continue to do the thing. Let's say me drinking bubbly is undesirable to you. You don't like it. And you want to extinguish my behavior of drinking bubbly. All right? Then what we do is we punish that behavior. So what we can do is we can punish behaviors that we deem to be undesirable. Again, thinking in general in life, we want to reward desirable behaviors. We want to punish undesirable behaviors. Well, there's two ways that we can punish it, and it works the exact same way as rewards. So we can add something that stick with me here, okay? So what we can do is we can add an undesirable reaction. What we can do is add an undesirable behavior. So what this means is, let's say that when I drink bubbly, you want me to stop drinking bubbly. You don't want me to take a sip of bubbly anymore. You might add an undesirable behavior, which would maybe be you start spamming chat again, okay? Like what we talked about earlier. So you can add an undesirable reaction. Here's another one. Maybe there's a button that you can press or a command you could write that puts a really high-pitched ringing sound in my headphones that I just absolutely can't stand. Or zap me. That's exactly right. You could think about like we do that with dogs. If they bark, you add an undesirable thing by hitting the shock collar. Okay, that's the entire thing. You add an undesirable behavior. If you kept making my ears ring every single time that I drank a bubbly, I am eventually going to stop drinking the bubbly because that's incredibly undesirable for me. So another example would be like if you tell a kid, if you keep doing this, I'm going to add chores. Like if you keep talking back to me, you're going to do the dishes tonight. All right, that's adding an undesirable behavior as a means to try to extinguish an undesirable behavior. So then we also have negative punishment, which is where we take something desirable, subtract desirable. Okay? So what this means is that you're going to remove something that I like. So let's say what you do is, let's say I take a drink of bubbly and you leave the stream. You stop watching me. You might say that you're removing your presence as a means to try to extinguish my behavior. So if I kept drinking bubbly and every time I drank bubbly, I lost a follower, like you removed your followership, or you left the stream, okay? Eventually, I'm going to stop drinking bubbly if I can realize that it's my bubbly. See, there you go, Gecko. Like, exactly. Like, that would make me stop drinking bubbly, because if I lose you by drinking bubbly, that's a punishment for me. I want you guys here. I want to do things that make it so that you want to continue showing up. You all reward me doing things by showing up and talking with me. And I hopefully reward you by bringing you content that you find meaningful. So the thing is, over time, what happens is, as these things continue and become more consistent at regular and or irregular intervals, what starts to happen is people do the things that have been rewarded and they extinguish the things that have been punished. So that's what I want to, okay, so I got to make sure I make this point because this point's really important, okay? What we want to do is we want to reward desirable behaviors, we want to punish undesirable behaviors. But here's the thing. We can punish desirable behaviors and we can reward undesirable behaviors. And maybe this is one way to help kind of explain this. Like, we can punish behaviors that are desirable, which then, actually, I'm gonna ask the class, if we punish a desirable behavior, what's gonna happen to the desirable behavior? They will stop doing it. There we go. Ding, ding, ding. Bloody and rouse, first to it. You will extinguish the desirable behavior. A classic example of this is teenagers. Okay, when teenagers are in families, a lot of times what happens is teenagers don't want to spend as much time with their families. That's just kind of how it goes, right? So oftentimes a desirable behavior in the context of the family is like to spend time with a teenager. But what they do is they punish it when it happens. So an example of this would be a teenager comes downstairs and they come and sit at the dinner table and they actually join the family for dinner. And somebody sitting at the family table, at the dinner table says, "It's about time you came down. Jesus, we never see you. Oh my God." Or they start going crazy about like, "Well, tell us about how your day. It's really nice that you're finally down here. Where the hell have you been?" That's like not cool. That's punishing a desirable behavior. That's going to extinguish the teenager coming downstairs and joining everybody for dinner. Because why the hell would I go downstairs and hang out with all of you if you're going to be shitty to me? This is right. This is the part where I think this is where it's going to hit home for a lot of people. Okay, this is the part that this is where me as a therapist, I'm looking at this shit all the time. And then the parents go, where did we go wrong? And so then where I pop in, Gappy, as a therapist, to say, well, you punished a desirable behavior, okay? So another example of this, if me drinking bubbly was truly desirable to you, and then you all left when I drank it, you just punished a desirable behavior. Or let's say this, like, let's say a desirable behavior for you is me coming online, but then you berate me the entire time that I'm here. That's punishing me for coming online. And so I'm going to stop coming online. That's, it's really powerful, okay, the way that we can do this. So let's say a child uses their words and asks for something, and we would say maybe at some point that that's desirable for the kid to do that. The kid uses their words and then they're dismissed by their parent. By the way, if you're a parent of a young child, the thing that it's really important to remember is that kids just want energy, okay? They want energy. They don't qualify it. They don't necessarily care so much whether that energy is you yelling at them versus you whispering to them versus you. They just want you to pay attention to them, okay? And so what can happen sometimes is kids will do things in order to get you to give them energy. If you don't give a kid energy when they are doing something desirable, you are punishing that behavior. You don't want to punish desirable behavior. You really want to be cognizant in your life of what are the things that you consider to be desirable. This even goes into self-talk. So here's another example of this. Let's say you go to the gym. Let's say you've been working really hard. You want to go to the gym. It's really important to you that you take care of yourself. You go to the gym. And then you go to the gym. You do the thing that's desirable, and you go home, and all you do is just rag on yourself for not being good enough. You go home and you say to yourself like, "Oh, I'm a piece of shit. I didn't lift as much weight as I wanted. It was stupid that I did that way. Oh, I'm like that kind of thing." You're punishing yourself for doing something that was desirable. By the way, that's also why, like, if you ever see a person like at the gym doing something that's like healthy for them, like, don't be an asshole. Don't laugh at them. Don't punish that's what's desirable. If you laugh at somebody who's not running very quickly on the treadmill, who's working their ass off, you're punishing them for a desirable behavior. You're an asshole if you do that. So again, we want to be rewarded for our desirable behaviors. Your self-talk is a means of rewarding a desirable behavior. But seriously, dismissing a kid who's trying to talk to you, not cool. Blowing off your partner. You know, if your partner makes a reasonable move to connect with you, maybe they use a soft startup to talk about something that's really sensitive, and then you blow your top, like, you've just punished that desirable behavior. Now, conversely, we can reward undesirable behaviors. And this is another thing that's really important to realize. When a kid throws a temper tantrum at the grocery store and the parent gives them attention for that, you have just rewarded an undesirable behavior because, again, kids want energy. Okay? So, no bueno. Okay? When people say, like, if your kid throws a temper tantrum in the grocery store, the way that you punish their behavior is to not give them attention, is to walk away. It's hilarious. Like, if your kid ever throws a temper tantrum in the grocery store, ignore it and walk away and watch that kid freak out and get up and run and try to find you. Like, that's a punishment for the undesirable behavior. You reward that behavior by caving in. And people with low distress tolerance tend to cave in faster on rewarding undesirable behavior, especially as parents. It's really important for us to realize these things. The whole customer is always right thing in retail breeds a sense of entitlement within customers because they know that they will be rewarded for being obnoxious. The whole, let me talk to the regional manager. Let me talk to the district manager. That gets energy. There's a reward for that, especially if you get your need met through that. So sometimes that's good. Sometimes you have to escalate. You have to escalate to get your needs met and to get your thing done. I'm not poo-pooing escalation. But that gets reinforced. Again, you have to look at the way that gets reinforced. If a person learns that if they raise hell, they're going to get their needs met, then they're going to continue to raise hell to get their needs met because they're rewarded for raising hell. What I say to parents all the time is one of the most effective things you can do when a kid is doing something undesirable is be completely flatlined in the way that you respond to them, because that's what's deemed as a punishment for a child. So what that means is if a kid gets up and they walk to the other side of the room and you want them to sit and be quiet, is you walk over, no emotion, no acknowledgement, no eye contact, pick the kid up, move them and sit them on the chair, and then go about and do your thing again, and don't give them any attention. Because the worst thing you can do is you can get angry at them, or you can like give them a whole bunch of energy and a whole bunch of attention, and you get up and you go and you look at them and you engage with them, and that's what they want. That's what they're doing. That's their entire goal, is to get your attention and to get you to notice them. And so if you capitulate to that, then what you've done is you've rewarded an undesirable behavior. Okay? So you want to reward them with attention when they do the thing that you want. So if the kid sits quietly in the chair and is behaving themselves, give them energy for that. Don't take it for granted. Look at the kid and say, hey, little Dr. Mick, I really appreciate that you are sitting quietly. That's awesome. You know what? I'm going to give you an extra 15 minutes of video games tonight because you're doing such a good job being quiet. So again, whenever a person that you know, or when a kid or whatever is doing something desirable, make sure that you notice that. If your partner makes the effort to make you breakfast in the morning, don't be an asshole about it and take it for granted. Reward it by giving them praise, by telling them that that matters to you. Okay? Like, it truly is important. Like, again, I'm not trying to I am somewhat trying to oversimplify this, but truly, if there's nothing else you remember from what I'm talking about tonight, it's that you want to move through life in such a way that you reward what is desirable and that you punish what is undesirable. You don't want to punish desirable and you don't want to reward undesirable, because you get in some nasty spirals with that. This isn't just like a one-shot thing where like one behavior exists in a vacuum, okay? There are multiple behaviors, multiple desirable and undesirable things happening at a given point in time. And so like you, in the spirit of conditioning one response, maybe you're rewarding one desirable behavior, but that at the same time is punishing an undesirable behavior. Like, we need to be cognizant of the intersection of all of these things so you can be mindful of the way you move through the world. You're never going to do it perfectly. There's going to be times where you punish a desirable behavior. There's going to be times where you reward an undesirable behavior. But the important thing is that that doesn't become a consistent pattern, because as soon as that becomes a pattern that happens at intervals that are become predictable, or even if they're intermittent, all of a sudden that's where it starts to become pattern, and that's where things become conditioned. You don't generally get conditioned on a one-off thing. Okay, like it's not a spontaneous deal. It's conditioning happens over time as things are continuously reinforced. That's behavioral conditioning. That's essentially how it works. Okay? It's do you deem a behavior to be desirable or undesirable? Do you want to make sure that behavior continues, or do you want to extinguish that behavior? If you want the behavior to continue, you can add a desirable consequence to that behavior, or you can subtract an undesirable consequence to that behavior. Okay? If you want to extinguish the behavior, then do you add an undesirable consequence, or do you subtract a desirable consequence as a means to extinguish the behavior from the person who is exhibiting the behavior that you have deemed to be undesirable? And being mindful in that process that you can reward undesirable behaviors, so you can add a desirable reaction to an undesirable behavior, or you can subtract an undesirable behavior in response to an undesirable behavior, and that will reward it. Okay? In the context of something that is desirable, you can add an undesirable reaction as a means to extinguish a desirable behavior, or you can subtract a desirable response in reaction to a desirable behavior, and that will work towards extinguishing a desirable behavior. Okay? So all this is an exercise in being mindful of that. What I'm working on as a therapist with people is I'm looking at their interaction patterns, whether it's with couples, whether it's with families, whether it's with individuals, and kind of the synthesis between their cognitions and their behaviors. I'm looking to see where are desirable consequences being added or subtracted, where are undesirable consequences being added or subtracted, and is that in the spirit of rewarding or punishing desirable behaviors or undesirable behaviors? And I'm watching for that so that I can help alter behaviors into what we want, which is to reward the desirable and punish the undesirable.